We're in Mark chapter 10. I'm really proud of Noah and Mabry. You guys take a minute and go back and look at their map. They've been working on it for a long time, and it really looks cool. And if everybody in here would build a map like that, you'd know more about geography for sure. Just by the way, the reason that geography is important in the study of the Bible is because it does play an important part in the telling of the story. The faith that I have is grounded in events that took place at a specific place at a specific time. And that's one of the beautiful things about the Bible as opposed to so many other religions on this planet, is that the Bible makes a solid case for the fact that this was something that happened at a specific place and a specific time. So knowing where Capernaum is it's not critical that you know that, but now I'm already off on a tangent, so I better get back to Mark chapter 10. The tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is not in Mark chapter 10, that's in Genesis, as you probably know. But I need to do something with you, and we're going to build on this concept. In the garden, God breathes into man's nostrils the breath of life. And man becomes. It's not that God gave man a soul. Man becomes a soul. That's Genesis. And he's not just a soul, he is a soul that is living. And if you look at the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Hebrew, it says that God breathed His breath into man's nostrils, and he became a zoe, suke. So that's a concept that we talk about a lot at the Black Hills Church. Anytime you see the word life or living in that context, it always implies what? Quality. It always implies this idea of not just existing, but really living. And so this idea is, it begins this thread of God's Spirit being breathed into man and him becoming a soul that is alive, not just existing, but really living. Begins in Genesis, and it's a thread that runs all the way through the Bible. So man has this, in Genesis, man has this relationship with God. He walks with Him. He talks with Him. And God coaches him on what's right and what's wrong. Man doesn't, now you got to understand this, man doesn't need to know what is right and wrong. He has a relationship with God. Right? So he doesn't have to figure out what's right and wrong. He's got a relationship with the one that defines truth and right and love and life. And so you've got man walking in this relationship with God in the garden. In the garden was this tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's God's way of presenting an alternative to depending on God. This is so important. You guys got to hear this. It's God's way of saying, here's an alternative to you depending on me to know what's right and what's wrong. You can go figure it out yourself. You can embrace this idea. And by the way, though I know it wasn't an apple, it was a pomegranate, but most people, you guys, I'm just kidding. I don't know what kind of fruit it was. But so often people say, well, it wasn't an apple. The Bible doesn't say it was an apple. I know the Bible doesn't say it was an apple, but most people assume that it was an apple. Consequently, when you see a picture of a teacher's desk in a book or something, typically there's a what? An apple sitting on the desk. Why is there an apple sitting on the desk? Well, the student brought her an apple because he likes her. That's not why the student brings the teacher an apple. The apple is symbolic of what? Knowledge. specifically, the apple is symbolic of knowledge of right and wrong. That comes all the way out of the story in Genesis. Why did Steve Jobs use an apple as the logo for his company? Because his company is all about building machines that can think and help you accumulate what? Knowledge. That's right. So we have in our culture this in fact, it's not just in our culture. Our world is enamored with this idea of being intelligent enough to figure out what's right and wrong. And we want that because we don't want the uncomfortable responsibility of depending on God to define what right and wrong is for us. Okay, so that's what's going on in Genesis. I read an article in the New York Times that was published in January of 2007 by a guy named D.T. Max. And the name of the article was Happiness 101. Now, you guys, if you want a really good tutorial on man declaring his independence from God and trying to find truth and happiness and right and wrong independently from God, this article in the New York Times is stunningly right on target. In fact, I may, when I post this sermon, I may just put a link to that New York Times article because it's worth reading. And in this article, Mr. Max talks about the sweeping new concept in psychology. That is, it is just taking our universities by storm. And it's this concept called positive psychology. Have you guys heard of this? Oh, this will bless you. You guys need to get you some of this positive psychology stuff because it's good. Here's what it does. So and it's all based on science. They've gone out and they've done all sorts of research to determine what makes people happy. Okay? And they're finding some interesting things about what makes people happy. For instance, one of the things this guy, Mr. Max, follows this through several universities, but he was in this one university class and was talking about some of the things they were teaching. So he has the kids go out first few days in his class, and he has them go find something that makes them feel good. And so he goes into some detail, by the way, which you guys may have to read fast through some of those because they're some of them are kind of graphic. But they go out and find things that make them feel good, and then the next thing he does, the next assignment is he has them go out and find somebody and just do something nice for that person with no regard for getting anything back. And then he has them talk about, what their experience was. And you know what they're finding? They're finding, scientifically, I roll my eyes for the tape, or for the audio. What they're finding is that if you pursue things that make you feel good, you wind up on what they call the hedonic treadmill. You know what that means? It means that it requires more and more of that thing, whatever it is, drugs or sex or whatever. It requires more and more of that thing to produce the good feeling, to the point where you eventually become addicted to just trying to get that good feeling. But what they're finding is that if people just go out and selflessly give to other people, they find happiness in that. They find fulfillment in that. Does that sound like something maybe you might have read in the scriptures? So they're out there, they're working so hard to find what it is that makes us happy, and then, they're applying science to the equation, and what they find is that the stuff that makes us fulfilled individuals is exactly what God's been telling us makes us fulfilled individuals for thousands of years. Well, I like it. So we're in Mark chapter 10. And we did this Some of you are reading. My first point there. Have you ever had a conversation where you suspected in the other individual that the wheel was still turning but the hamster was dead? Have you guys ever had that kind of conversation? Tim is one of those that always reads ahead, so he always kind of chuckles before you guys typically get into the slide. But Jesus has had a conversation like this. So here's the way the conversation goes. And we talked about this conversation last week in the discussion on ransom. So last week, Jesus says to his disciples, he's gathered them together, and he says, and I know the scriptures don't say this exactly, but I think this is what happened. He pulls his disciples together, and he says, I got something on my heart. I got to talk to you guys. You guys got a minute? And they say, sure. And so he's got them all gathered in a huddle, and he says, we're headed for Jerusalem. And when I get there, they're going to capture me, and they're going to torture me. And they're going to spit on me, and they're going to mock me, and they're going to kill me, and I'm going to be raised on the third day. And the sons of thunder say, Jesus, can we have a promotion? I mean, do you see how it just whistled right past them? He's saying, I'm going to be crucified and I'm going to be resurrected. And they're saying, hey, can we have a promotion? Can we sit on your left hand and your right? And I heard somebody say they had their mother do the asking, which some of the parallel Gospels gives us that additional piece of information that they had their mom go talk to Jesus. Raw ambition. There is some profound irony in their request. Here's what they asked. They said, this will bless you, watch this. They said, when you come into your glory, can we be on your left and right? Now, when was it that Jesus was most glorified? I mean, we get this, but they didn't. When was it? That's right. When they lifted him up on that cross, he is glorified before the world. That's why the symbol of my faith today is not a fish. I don't have a problem with the fish, you understand? But my symbol, the symbol of my faith is the cross. That's where Jesus is glorified. So this is the picture of him glorified. Here's the position these two guys are asking for. They're asking, can we occupy your left and right hand when you are glorified? And Jesus says, you don't have a clue what you're asking for. Can you be immersed in what I'm going to be immersed in? Are you able to drink this cup that I'm going to drink? And they say what? Oh yeah, we can do it. They don't have a clue what they're saying. Verse 33, we're going to Jerusalem. Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. And 3 days later he will rise. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, come to him and say, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Kind of Jesus as a genie in a bottle kind of thing. Just rub the bottle and out pops Jesus and he'll give you what you want. It's a good thing we don't have that mentality in the 21st century, huh? What do you want? he said, and they replied, let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left hand. One of us want to be the chief of staff and the other the prime minister. And he says, you don't know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink, be baptized with the baptism that I'll be baptized with? And they said, we can. And Jesus said, well, you'll drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I'm going to be baptized with. But to sit at my right and left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. I don't have a clue what that means, by the way. I mean, the commentators want to speculate on who that might be. I don't have a clue. And Jesus doesn't bother telling us or even giving us a hint as to who that might be. But I love this. Verse 41, when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Why is that? Why were they mad at James and John? Well, because they didn't think of this first, primarily. You know, James and John have got this ambition to rise to the top of the heap. And so, Jesus says, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. I love this, verse 43. What? Not so. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. He must be the prime minister. He must be the chief servant. Not the prime minister, but he must be the best minister. And whoever wants to be first among you. By the way, did you realize here that Jesus doesn't say it's wrong to want to be number one? You know, we've taught that, I think, that it's not okay to want to be number one. It's okay to want to be number one. Jesus doesn't condemn that. He just says use that drive to be number one by becoming the best servant. By becoming the number one servant. Almost done. The ladder of success. Chase read this in Philippians Chapter 2. Do our guys do a good job up here reading, by the way?
Absolutely.
Proud of them, all of them. Chase read that section in Philippians Chapter 2 where Paul is dealing with this concept of ambition and wanting to climb this ladder. And so he says you should have the same kind of concern for other people that you have for yourself, he says. So that's that section that Chase read. And then the very next section says, have this attitude in you, which was also in Christ, who although he existed at the top of the ladder, he didn't regard that as something to be held on to, but he climbed. Watch him invert the ladder of success. He climbed down the ladder, not just becoming a human, not just becoming a human slave, but becoming a human slave on a cross. He says that's why at the name of Jesus, what? Every knee should bow and every tongue should confess. Why is that? Because he is most glorified when he climbs down the ladder of success instead of up the ladder of success. And because of that, Paul says, God's going to put him on a pedestal. That's why we worship Jesus. We worship Jesus because he climbed down the ladder of success. Last and final point. If you don't get the gospel that says you are saved by grace through faith. If you don't get the gospel, you will never, ever do anything out of a selfless motive. Now watch this. Anybody who's working to get themselves to heaven, if they help the little old lady across the street, why are they helping the little old lady across the street? To get to heaven. They're not helping the little old lady across the street because they care about the little old lady. They're helping the little old lady across the street because they want to rack up points so God will let them go to heaven. That's not selflessness. That's just selfishness in priestly robes. That's just pretense. But if you folks are saved by grace, if God has already said, Marvin, you're in. You're safe. If He's already said that to Sabrina, and Sabrina actually buys into that, now this is the key. If Sabrina actually buys into this idea that I am saved, are you folks saved? Yes. Yeah. Are you being saved? Yeah, but are you saved? I love this. You no longer have to do anything to rack up points. Then you're free to walk out into the world and serve people totally selfless. Do you see how beautiful that is? How magnificent it is? You see what legalism steals from you? Legalism steals from you the ability to go out and really be selfless. So much of what Christians do, they do for all the wrong reasons. We haven't been sent into the world to serve people less fortunate than us so that we get points so we can go to heaven. Jesus has already given my account all the points I need, what? To go to heaven. Yeah. Now I am free to walk out that door and go serve you folks who don't deserve to be served. And to serve the other folks out there who don't deserve to be served. Because I'm totally in. But you can't get there as long as you're holding on to legalism. You can't. I just had to do that little dig on legalism before we bring this to a conclusion. Nothing wrong with ambition. Young people, be ambitious. Just have the ambition that I'm going to go out and out-serve everybody else. Not to be saved, but because you have been. And if you haven't been saved, for God's sake, and for your sake, don't leave today before we have that conversation. Okay? A good time to do that is when Jim steps up here and leads us in the invitation song.